Hiya, how's it going? Welcome to the first ever episode of Born Optimistic. Thank you so much for listening. I hope the name tells you all you need to know. My name is Donald Scannell. We're going to be asking people questions about their worldviews and how they got there. Our first ever guest, and I'm really delighted we get to start with Moby, a man who's been in my life as a fan for such a long time. Go, I'll never forget hearing it for the first time, just exploded into my mind. But now Moby is an activist for ecology issues. He's really into vegan issues. He's got a vegan restaurant. And I'm so thrilled he's the first ever guest. I've got one favour to ask you. Wherever you are, send us a picture, send us a holler, let us know what you think of the show. On Twitter, Born Optimistic. Facebook, Born Optimistic Show. Thank you so much. We're about to press play on Moby, recorded in the little tiny pool cabin guest house beside his house in Los Angeles last November. Music biogs are probably my favourite thing to read, but it was just incredibly intimate. You didn't, well, I mean, I don't know, but you didn't seem to hold back at all. Did you know? Did you have a plan before you wrote it?
Well, I mean, I've never written a memoir before, and I had worked under the assumption that memoirs were written by old politicians or disgraced public figures or pop stars. But then, I guess, it all started with Patti Smith's Just Kids, for me at least. Like, that was when I realized that you could write a sort of discrete, when I say discrete, I mean like dealing with like a specific period of time, memoir before you turn 90. I mean, Bob Dylan's Chronicles was similar, where it was like, it was partially about Bob Dylan, but very much about what it was like to be in New York during the nascent folk scene there. And I thought presumptuously perhaps that I had enough interesting things happen to me. And also I thought that enough interesting things had happened in New York during the period that's covered by the memoir that it warranted being written. You know, like if I was Chris Martin from Coldplay, and I like Chris, I'm not saying this to malign him, but like there's not much to write about. You know, he had nice parents. I've met his parents. They're lovely. And his first record became successful, and his entire adult life has been spent being successful. So like if you've had a relatively stable, prosaic life, probably is not going to make for the best memoir. But my life has been neither stable nor prosaic, so I sort of thought, why not try and write about it? And then the question I had to ask myself was, okay, how do I write a memoir and not waste people's time? Like I didn't want to just I didn't want this to be a PR exercise. Like I didn't want to try and portray myself in some sort of flattering light that might help my Q rating. You know, I didn't want to write a self-penned hagiography. I wanted to write something honest, because it should be self-evident, but I don't know if it is, to say that like the goal of art should either be like abject entertainment or honesty, you know, because like maybe I'm rambling on, but there's like the sort of like the existential sort of underpinnings of everything that we do is trying to make sense of how baffling it is to be alive as a human being, especially in a universe that's 15 or 16 billion years old, you know, so like we're alive for a couple of decades. We pretend that we're immortal. We pretend that our lives have meaning and significance, but deep down, we know that we die, we disappear, and we have no idea what, if any, meaning or significance our lives have had. So for me, the response to that is just solidarity and communication, you know? And so that's one of the reasons why I aspired to write an honest memoir, because I wanted to talk about my experience being human. I didn't want to lie about any aspect of it because there's enough disingenuous culture in our world. Like I don't feel the need to add more disingenuity to our sort of cultural pantheon.
I was very relieved when I got to the end of the book. Well, I wasn't relieved when the book ended, but I was relieved the way you said that you had changed some of the names.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what was that process like in terms of, did you seek permission or forgiveness, or was it a cathartic process for you? Because, you go through a litany of bumps and grinds that, many of us have been through, but writing it into a book, what was that process like for you in terms of processing your past?
Well, the oddest thing about writing a memoir, and I've sometimes described it as being like psychedelic time travel. So I would find myself, I live in LA now, I would find myself in LA, sitting down with my laptop and maybe a cup of tea, and writing about an experience that I had in New York 26 years ago. But in the course of the writing, remembering the experience felt more real. And so I would sort of emerge from writing and have to remind myself that, no, I actually live in Los Angeles in the 21st century and not in New York in 1991. So it is, it felt sort of Proustian in a way like that, like really revisiting and in a very tactile, sensory way, immersing yourself in a past that is long gone. And there's also something fascinating as like a therapeutic or diagnostic tool to revisit yourself as a stranger, and it gives you insights into who you are and how you orient yourself towards the world and how you orient yourself towards yourself. And you gain an objectivity that's really hard to have in the present moment. So even if the book had never come out, and even if no one had ever read it, I still would have loved the act of writing it, especially for that sort of diagnostic ability.
Did you feel you had to get in touch with every single person mentioned in the book? What was there kind of or did a fact checker do it? I mean, what was that process like?
The criteria that I employed for determining who should be in the book and whether I should use their real names, the criteria was both practical and personal. The practical side was, did I say anything that would subject me to litigious action on the part of the people I've written about? So I actually had to go through the book with a lawyer. I guess this happens in the States whenever you write a book that's like a Bildungsroman, which is a great word that you can only really use in this case. So you write a book that is based on your life and involves real people. You have to figure out if they can sue you for it. So a lot of the names were changed simply so I wouldn't get sued. But then also, I didn't really throw anyone under the bus. Like I didn't have any axes to grind. Like the only person who emerges from the book scathed is me. Like everyone else is kind of described, I think, quite sympathetically. In fact, I've had a few of my old friends who I haven't talked to in a long time, they've read the book and they've contacted me to say thank you for not throwing them under the bus, because they knew that they could have been. Like I actually left out a lot of the bad stuff because I just didn't want to do what Morrissey did with his memoir, which I liked, but he used it as an opportunity to really sort of address grievances. And I just wanted to be kind to other people and throw myself under the bus.
The book finishes just as you're making play and as your life is about to, or your career is about to really change. And you really, really saw yourself as a failure up to that point. And I was really surprised by that, because that wouldn't have been my perception at all. Moby was a big name, done all this cool stuff, was making records, and yet you literally thought your career was going to end. And even right through the book, there's a real awareness of money and lack of it, and collecting tin cans to buy fruit or almond milk, and I was really curious about how or if money would change your life. And of course, the book finishes before that point. But you grew up, as you say in the book, one of the few poor kids in Connecticut, it seemed, and surrounded by all these rich people, and money is in the book so often. It's really obvious that you're not materialistic, but it was such a part of your reality, the absence of money. And then, the book, everyone knows that Play was this huge record and all of the tracks licensed and loads of hit singles. And the book ends before that. And I'm just like, that whole question of success and going from the absence of money to the presence of money.
I mean, 'cause I grew up very, very poor. My mother and I were on food stamps and welfare, which I guess in Europe would be just government assistance. And in the course of my adult life, I've experienced abject poverty. At one point in the book, I was living in an abandoned factory in a crack neighborhood, and I had no bathroom and I had no running water. And then especially after the success of albums like Play and 18, I had a lot of material success. And I feel like in a way, and maybe I'm anthropomorphizing a non-anthropomorphizable experience, but like I feel like in a way like the universe has played this very benign, complicated joke on me. Because when I was growing up, like most people, I assumed that fame and wealth delivered happiness and delivered emotional stability. And then the universe, in its complicated, I was going to say wisdom, but I guess it's complicated wisdom, it gave me both. It gave me more fame than I'd ever imagined, and it gave me more money than I'd ever imagined. And I'd never been less happy. Like after the success of Play and after the success of 18, I found myself a miserable, narcissistic, entitled, famous, wealthy alcoholic. And maybe other people would have had a different experience, but it was really interesting to be given everything that you thought could deliver happiness and find out that these things don't deliver happiness. And if I was the only person to have had that experience, I would say clearly I'm a dysfunctional anomaly. Like I'm an outlier because clearly everybody else who has fame and money has figured out how to be happy with it. But then we look around, we're like, okay, well, there's Kurt Cobain. Okay, he didn't seem very happy with fame and money. There's just around the corner, Brad and Angelina. Like, can you think of in the course of human history, two people with, they're at the top 0.0001% of the human pantheon of fame and wealth and beauty, and they're miserable and they're getting a divorce. So I don't know why we still hold on to this idea that fame and wealth deliver happiness, because they don't. And they're the people who find happiness with fame and wealth, oftentimes I would say find happiness in spite of it. They find happiness because they love their job. Like I think Elon Musk is pretty happy because he loves his job. I don't think he's happy because he's famous and wealthy. I think he loves waking up and going to work every morning. Like at this point in my life, I'm happy because I love making music. I love writing books. I love my friends. I love going hiking. I love reading other people's books. I like eating good food, but fame and wealth, like on their own, all they do is make things complicated. And there's so much evidence to support that idea, and there's almost no evidence to support the idea that fame and wealth can deliver happiness. So I'm totally confused as to why we collectively buy into that idea.
Because at the end of Porcelain, it kind of felt the way the book was written that the drinking had to stop. Like I kind of felt like, we were all rooting for you, and we're all there for you, and I'm just kind of a bit oh my God, I didn't realize that the drinking didn't stop at that point. I just assumed, because it just seemed like it was getting crazier and crazier and crazier.
Well, addiction is a funny thing, because I sometimes think I compare addiction to rational choices. And what I mean by that is, in the year 1992, I went to a vegan Japanese restaurant and I ate a purple Japanese eggplant, and it gave me food poisoning. So as a result, for the next 12 years, I stayed away from purple Japanese eggplants, which was kind of irrational. But then I think of drinking, where I was incapacitated and sick with hangovers 5 days a week for about 20 years. So why did I keep doing it? And it's that, it makes me think of like Einstein and his definition of mental illness. He said mental illness is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. So why, for years, did I keep drinking, keep doing drugs, keep dating the wrong people, keep doing all these things that were making me sick and miserable, but I kept doing them? And even regarding fame, like I kept touring, even though I hate touring. And I remember at one point, the absurdity of that struck me, where I was getting ready to do a long tour, keeping in mind I really hate touring. I was getting ready to do a long tour, and my manager, who's this dry-witted older German guy, he said, well, why are you going on tour if you hate touring? And my honest answer was that I was afraid that if I didn't tour, I would lose relevance. But the only consequence of being relevant is that you can keep going on tour. And so I was like, wow, I'm doing a thing that I hate to guarantee that I'll be able to keep doing this thing that I hate. And the absurdity of that, it's like, it makes me think of Donald Trump and so many people who will think of it as like being in high society. Like, they go to parties that they hate and have conversations with people they don't like, but they can't stop because they're afraid of losing the ability to go to the parties that they hate, to have conversations with people they don't like. And I'm like, I'd rather just stay home and read a book and go hiking.
Well, sometimes it feels like everyone in the planet is keeping up with the Joneses, and whatever level the Joneses next to them happen to be, that we're bred into this constant idea of discontentment, that whatever we have isn't enough, that we should want more. And yeah, I am totally aware of that no matter how much money you have or how much access you have, you'll always find somebody else with more if that's what you're looking for. You'll find someone to compare yourself to. Why do you think you drank? Like what? I mean, some people say alcoholism is a disease, which I personally, I'm ambivalent about. But for me, I see it as a symptom. I see it as, if you're doing it, it's because of something else.
Well, I drank for a bunch of reasons. And I guess seeing as you're Irish and this is going to go out in Ireland, I'm assuming that quite a lot of people will relate to this, because I certainly have some Irish in my ancestry. I drank because, on its most basic level, I loved alcohol. Like, it was a stimulant and a sedative, and it was psychedelic for me. And it made me comfortable. It woke me up. It made me excited. It erased all of my insecurities and my feelings of inadequacy. It did everything, which is why for decades, I really, like, alcohol was my God, and for a while it was a pretty benign God until it started giving me hangovers that lasted for days. And when I wasn't drunk, I was panicking and depressed and anxious. And so that's why I drank. But yes, I mean, like, and I don't want to sound like just like another cliched middle-aged sober guy in Southern California, but when I stopped drinking, I had to go through this process of asking myself that question, like, apart from the fact that I loved alcohol, why did I drink? And really, it's the bigger question, why do we do anything? And we do everything based on assumptions. Really, everything's based on assumptions. And sometimes we engage in bad behavior based on erroneous assumptions. Like, an example would be, I would walk into a cocktail party or any party, and I would be immediately uncomfortable, and I would drink to make myself feel comfortable. And my discomfort was that I assumed everybody else was judging me, and that everyone else was better than I was, and that everyone else knew terrible things about me. These are clearly wrong assumptions. So when you then go through the process of identifying what those very ingrained assumptions are, and with evidence try to challenge them and replace them, and you realize when you walk into a party, everyone's insecure, everyone's scared, everyone doubts themselves, except for the sociopaths. And then you realize, oh, why am I self-medicating for a problem that doesn't actually exist? And that's the best part for me of sobriety, is being able to, like, unearth these deeply held assumptions and realize that they are erroneous.
Do you think it's a disposition, like the propensity to be addicted to something, whether it's, gambling or porn or drugs or alcohol or money? Do you think it's something we're born with? Is it something we acquire? Is it something we inherit from previous generations?
I feel like I mean, I can only speak for myself and for, for what I've observed in other people, but like there's that idea of an addictive personality. But addiction isn't rocket science. It's that the brain finds something it really likes and it holds on to it. For some people, that's porn. For some people, that's gambling. For some people, it's shopping or food or alcohol or crystal meth. Because our poor little brains, they don't know any better. The brain is just this complicated organ locked in a box, and all it knows is how it feels. It doesn't have eyes. We have eyes that feed information to the brain. It doesn't have ears. We have ears that feed information to the brain. So the brain's making all these decisions based on how it feels, based on heredity and information that's coming at it from all of our sense organs. So it's trying to make sense of all these things, but it also, and maybe this is irrelevant, but I think it's quite interesting, it also has a genetic predisposition towards adversity. Because all of our ancestors, human and not, going back for the last 3.5 billion years, were basically hungry and scared. And so the brain just assumes that we are hungry and scared. And so if it finds something that makes it feel good, it just holds on to it, whether it's a bad relationship, whether it's alcohol, whether it's shopping, whatever. Like it finds that thing, and the brain doesn't ask itself whether the behavior is healthy or sustainable. The brain only asks itself, do I feel good right now? And we could have a much longer conversation about neural architecture, about like where those thoughts reside in the brain, as opposed to like enabling the prefrontal cortex. So we have like a more executive understanding of choices and consequences, which is really what most therapy and meditation and sobriety are all about, is like moving away from our brainstem and our feral choices and coming to a more sort of like rational, cognitive relationship towards the world around us.
And in some ways, historically, religion would have kind of played that part of a way to live that I guess you were supposed to just adopt unquestioningly. So, I mean, one of my things with religion is that I wish it was a bit more adaptive. I'm raised in the Catholic ethos. So it's our whole thing, it's not very malleable, it doesn't really roll with the times that much at all. And like, God is a word, those 3 letters you use a lot. So I don't really know when you say God, or I know in the book in terms of religion when you were a kid, but where are you at now in terms of religion and God and its place in our world?
Well, I mean, in the course of my life, there are times when I was an atheist, times when I was an agnostic, times when I was a Taoist, times when I was a Christian, times when I was just a secular degenerate. And then there's, the 12 steps, which applies to alcoholism, applies to lots of addictions, like the 12-step model. The most challenging of the 12 steps to me is the 3rd step, which says, made a decision to turn our life and our will over to God as we understood God. And when I did the 12 steps, I came to that step and I was like, well, that's pretty huge, because there's my life and my will, that's everything, turned over to the care of God. And I was like, what does that mean? And I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I spent about a month wrestling with that. And it said the God of my understanding. And I kept wrestling with that phrase because I was like, well, I don't understand God. I don't know who God is. And I was like, the universe is potentially 15 billion years old, or it's atemporal and exists in dimensions we can't even conceive of. I was like, so how can I, as someone in his 40s, except the time I was in my 40s, I was like, how can I objectively understand who God is? And then the realization I had was, oh, I don't understand who God is. So the God of my understanding is a God that I don't understand, because in human form, we cannot understand God. You just can't. It's and once I accepted that, everything's fine. So I talk to God all the time, and I have no idea who I'm talking to. But I have ideas. I mean, who knows? Maybe we die, we go to heaven, and there is some angry old guy with a beard who like gets mad at us because we jerked off when we were 14 years old, or like we stole candy when we were a kid. Like I assume that's not the case. I assume that whatever divinity is, one, does not behave in a petty manner. Like I just don't see God being upset with how you describe God. You know, like I don't think God, like when we die, I don't think we go to heaven or wherever we go and God says, well, you could get into heaven, except you called me one thing and not another. You know, the absurdity of that. And I don't know. So it's the part of, for me, being human is that question of like just wondering who and what God might be, but I don't need an answer. I'm okay. Like I don't need a picture. I don't need a name. I'm just okay to sort of constantly talk to God and ask whatever God might be, just say like, what do you think I'm supposed to do now? And understanding I'm going to make mistakes, but just always just asking.
So that there is a higher force of some description.
Yeah, I think it's funny when people categorically deny the existence of God. I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe there's nothing, but I don't know how, like in philosophy, I remember taking a logic class when I was a philosophy major, and there's one sort of facile, specious approach to proving the existence of God called the watchmaker theory. And it basically means you can't make something complicated from nothing. Like a watch, like a Swiss Army or a Swiss watch doesn't just magically appear. Like something complicated has to give rise to something complicated. And broadly speaking, I sort of believe that. I sort of believe that like we look at the unspeakable complexity of life, you know, how somehow DNA can turn dirt and water into a redwood or a little bush, how somehow two seeds can become optic nerves and skin and this huge, complicated, self-sustaining organism. I'm like, you know what? I don't know what's going on, but based on that, it seems like something's going on, you know, like just how, and when science says, oh, it's just evolution, I'm like, perhaps. I love science, and I think that whatever belief in God that I have is completely supported by science. Like whenever there's a new scientific discovery that points to the unspeakable complexity of the universe, I'm like, I think that the divine might be in there somewhere, you know.
But science, I suppose, doesn't go all the way. That's the thing, that when you dive deeper and deeper and deeper into the Big Bang Theory, for want of a better word, there's still this unknown at the very center of the core scientific theories.
It is really fascinating to me that like science and philosophy and spirituality are all ending up at the same place, which, to overgeneralize, is a place where we see the complexity of things, but we have no understanding of it, you know. But maybe it's not our job as humans to understand the complexity. Maybe we're just supposed to sort of stand back and very benignly observe it. You know, maybe we have the rest of eternity to understand the complexity. Maybe we have a few decades now to just sort of be separated from it and look at it and try to almost take like a humanistic Hippocratic oath and like just do no harm.
I read something recently that really kind of freaked me out. It's like that hardcore Buddhists believe that humanity is a punishment for getting something wrong in a previous existence. That if you're incarnated as a human, it's because you got a previous life wrong and you haven't got it right yet. And that really kind of like stopped me.
As long as there have been people, there have been stories. And people's favorite stories are about people, you know, like in creation myths and whatever. The moment any creation story leaves the world of metaphor is when I have no interest in it. You know, whenever someone tries to, with any specificity, tell me what exactly is going on, I'm like, you don't know. So like if if a Christian tries to tell me that there's heaven and hell and whatever, I'm like, no, probably not. If a Muslim tries to tell me that, like, suicide bombers go to heaven where they're given lots of virgins, I'm like, no, probably not. Or if a Buddhist tries to say, like, oh, there's this karma and you're reincarnated specifically as one thing, I'm like, no, because you're trying to get specific around something that we can't know. Like, anyone trying to describe God or the divine with specificity would be like me trying to, I don't know, describe the Tokyo subway system. Like, I've never been on the subway system in Tokyo. How could I describe it? So it's so absurd whenever. And the other thing with specificity around creation and the divine is it's always self-serving. Like, I have yet to meet someone who describes the divine with specificity who isn't somehow professionally involved in the consequences of that. Like when Catholics tell me, here's when Catholics present to me the specific Catholic universe, I'm like, well, that's kind of your job to say that. The same way, like, if a Buddhist says that there's this reincarnation, whatever, I'm like, well, if you say that, people keep coming back. So I'm just super wary of professionally self-interested specificity around a divine and a universe that we can't know anything about.
What is the thing you find hardest in life?
For me, the hardest part of being alive is my lack of understanding. Like, I know that the universe is unspeakably complicated, but I still respond to things on this very reductionist way. Like, what I mean is, like, I look at a house plant and I just see it as a house plant. Of course, I know that there are billions and billions and billions of complicated cells, and it's going through photosynthesis and creating oxygen and going through mitosis, and all these things are happening. But still, I just feel like such a dimwit in the presence of complexity because I just still see things as being simple. And to me, that's the hardest thing. And it's sort of like the core of existentialism is that question of, like, we have no objective knowledge of the universe as it actually is. And so the spirituality that I tend to trust the most is the spirituality that's based on an acceptance of that. Of an acceptance of, oh, the universe is ancient and complicated and we know nothing about it. Okay, now let's just accept that and be nice to each other.
Everything is wrong. The sleeve notes to that record, 1995, was it? Really changed me in many ways, and it's something that I've come back to many, many times. The idea of the joined up thinking that you kind of displayed, the idea of, as you said, this piece of metal and plastic and type out this piece, all of the different things that are wrong in the world. And now, all these years later, you've got a record called Systems. These systems are failing. These systems are failing, and the photographs in the sleeves are, you've moved to non-verbal communication, but a lot of the same issues kind of remain unsolved. And you, as an individual who's been aware of these things all your life, and made other people aware of these things all your life, how do you feel about the pace of change, or how things change, or what changes? How do you cope with knowing what you know and the world still being how it is?
The world is a heartbreaking place because for the simplest reason that, like, we collectively, the 7 billion of us, are making all these choices and in the process destroying the environment, destroying other creatures, destroying each other, and destroying ourselves. So it's like, it's such a kick in the teeth. Like, we're burning through all these resources, destroying the environment, and we're not very happy. Like, it would almost be excusable or forgivable if we were all really happy as we burn through all the oil and the timber and all the resources. Like, if we were having the greatest party ever and we're just delirious with joy, maybe it would almost be forgivable. But the fact is, like, we're having this huge party and burning through all these resources, and we've never been more anxious, we've never been more depressed, and it all comes down to this simple concept that humans hate, which is just 2 words: evidence and consequences. People hate evidence, especially long-term evidence, and they hate the idea that actions have consequences. Especially, I'm just going to speak for Americans. Like Americans think that they can smoke cigarettes and eat McDonald's and be healthy. I was like, no, there's no evidence to support that idea. So if you keep doing it, you're ignoring mountains of evidence. People think they can stay in miserable relationships and be happy. People think they can stay in jobs that they hate and be happy. And it's like, no, just the unwillingness that we collectively have to look at evidence and to assess consequences is so heartbreaking.
How do you coexist with these people?
When I talk about evidence and consequences, like I'm just as guilty. I don't think that there's been a human who has ever been exempt from the human condition. And a lot of my friends who are doing like different types of spirituality, like they're looking for these transcendent experiences that will somehow separate them from humanity. And to me, like the best spirituality is when you realize the humanity that you see in other people, the fallibility you see in other people exists in you just as much. So I might have a different perspective as a result of, I don't know, education, heredity, privilege, having DHA oil in my smoothie every morning. Like I have no idea I might have a different perspective, but my humanity is identical to everyone else's. I just have maybe learned to apply the idea of looking at evidence to the choices that I make, and that I'm just hoping that we as a species evolve not to the place where I am. I'm saying that we evolve to a place where we stop making such bad choices, because 7 billion people day in, day out making bad choices is destroying everything. And that would be the most heartbreaking thing. It's like 100 years from now, if we have an uninhabitable planet because human beings didn't know themselves well enough to make good choices. Like that would just be the stupidest thing ever.
You seem very cognizant of your own actions and how you roll. And, is owning and operating a vegan restaurant, is that just because you want a place to eat the food you want, or do you feel it's in some way contributing to building the type of world you hope exists?
I think of my day job as being activism. And whether it's animal activism or climate activism or human rights activism, like that's the only good use of fame, is to try and be a better activist, to try and be an advocate for things that you think are important. I don't know if I'm doing a good job. I don't know if my actions have any long-term beneficial consequences. I have no idea. It's one of the perils of not being omniscient. Like I don't understand chaos theory. Like I don't understand if my actions are making things better or worse or just having no impact at all. But I wake up every day and just try and do what little things I can.
Well, what have you learned or what have you noticed since Little Pine opened? What's happened as a consequence of that? Even what have you noticed happening that didn't happen before it opened?
Well, I've been a vegan now for 29 years, and I'm a vegan activist. I'm a vegan evangelist. It doesn't mean everybody in the world has to be vegan, but at the very least, people need to be willing to look at the consequences of widespread animal agriculture. And to that end, I make videos, I write essays, I support documentaries, I give money to organizations. But I also opened my restaurant as a way of representing the concepts that I believe in. And because I can write an essay and someone can read the essay about veganism or animal rights, and maybe they even agree with me. But bringing them to my restaurant and giving them a beautiful plate of food and a lovely bottle of vegan organic wine, like that might accomplish more than an essay. So it's, again, I try to do everything I can without being so presumptuous as to say that I'm doing anything right or that I'm having a good effect or good impact, but I just keep trying.
And I know it's a long time ago, but why did you become a vegan?
Well, first, 31 years ago, I became a vegetarian. Is that right? 31? Yeah, about when I was around 19 years old. And the reason I became a vegetarian was because I was petting a cat that I had rescued. And I loved this cat so much. And up until the time I had this, what I'll call my like Saul on the road to vegan Damascus epiphany, I had held on to the paradox that most of us hold on to, which is I loved animals, but I also ate at Burger King. Like I was perfectly happy with that paradox. And then I was petting this rescue cat, and I suddenly realized the cat that I was petting had 2 eyes and a central nervous system and a very profound emotional life and a desire to avoid pain and suffering. And then at that moment, a little switch got thrown in my brain, and I suddenly realized, oh, every animal with 2 eyes and a central nervous system has a profound emotional life and a desire to avoid pain and suffering. And so that led me to be a vegetarian. And then a couple of years later, became a vegan, and that was 29 years ago.
So in the intervening years, your relationship with alcohol, drugs, sex, God has changed quite dramatically, but your relationship to what you eat hasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what does that say to you in terms of your defining influences in your life? That all the flux, that's been a constant.
Well, the only 2 constants in my life have been music and veganism. And music, because it's just what I love so much, and veganism, because I have even like, sober, not sober, degenerate, not degenerate, Christian, not Christian, whatever, like all those choices, those were choices where the consequences only affected me. Veganism is a choice where the consequences affect other sentient beings. And that's why it never wavered. Like if I was filling my body with cocaine and vodka, I was hurting myself. I wasn't really directly hurting anyone else. Whereas if I support animal agriculture, I feel like I'm harming other sentient creatures. So that's why that has been, for me, a non-negotiable.
And where do you stand on eating insects?
Eating insects, it's funny because I've been a vegan for a long time. So what I love are the peripheral questions. And what I usually will say when confronted with peripheral questions is my focus is on the big question, which is the 100 billion animals who are killed every year for human purposes. Like, to me, that until I can successfully redress that, the other questions are light and fun. Like a recurring question someone will ask me is like, if I was on a desert island and there were only rabbits there, would I kill a rabbit to live? And I was like, I've never been on a desert island. I have no idea. How about let's talk about animal. So eating insects, for example, I hope to never eat insects. I actually have spent a lot of time, this might sound a little crazy, but like from my perspective, like insects have 2 eyes and they really want to avoid pain and suffering. Like I've probably spent way too much time because like in urban environments, it's hard to find animals. I found a lot of insects. So I spent a lot of time with ants and cockroaches and spiders and whatever. And like, I don't know what thoughts they're having, but I do know that they will do everything in their power to avoid pain and suffering. So I would just as soon not be involved in anything that caused pain and suffering to a creature that's trying to avoid it. Of all the arable land that's currently being used for agriculture, 99% goes to support animal agriculture. 1% doesn't. I'd rather eat beans than insects. Like, I'm really fond of beans. Beans, no ethical consequences, high in protein, high in fiber, high in phytonutrients. So like a lovely plate of black beans as opposed to a plate of ground up grasshoppers, I'll choose the beans.
Why do you think that humans show so little regard for other living creatures?
I would say people, myself included, like a lot of people live in this paradox. Like, I don't think that humans show disregard for the lives of other creatures. I think that people don't see how other creatures are treated. Like the slaughterhouses, the feedlots, these are kept very far away from polite society. So your average person in Dublin, they go to the supermarket, and if they're buying meat, they're buying this hygienically wrapped piece of flesh. They don't see the suffering. They don't see the death. They don't see the torture. So they can still hold on to the idea that they like animals. They can go home and pet their dog. They can pet their cat, and they can fry up their steak, pretending that they're actually not hurting anything. And it's one of the reasons I love being a vegan. Is I don't have to pretend. I don't have to pretend that I'm engaged in a process that is contrary to my beliefs and my ethics.
What do you think of all these strides recently in terms of this lab-grown meat?
Lab-grown meat is interesting. It's not, there's a word that I wish was in common usage because it's a really good word, and people just think that you're mispronouncing the word practical, which is practicable. And practicable means, can it be done? And so lab-grown meat right now, because it's so cost prohibitive, it's not practicable. And practicable is actually a word. It's not just me with a speech impediment.
Could you imagine yourself, like it's been so long now for you, can you imagine yourself eating a lab-grown steak with that, or would that just repulse you as a concept?
I've been a vegetarian for 31 years, a vegan for 29 years. So if someone gave me lab-grown hamburger or lab-grown steak, I would probably choose not to eat it. I don't think there's clearly the ethics of eating lab-grown meat are pretty benign, except it's so much, it just costs so much to make it. But if it gets to the point where lab-grown meat costs as much to produce as animal meat, then I assume that most people would choose the lab-grown meat because it'd be safer, and there'd be no death and pain and suffering attached to it.
And your book, of course, is all New York, and if you were to say to the New York you that you were going to end up living in LA, and it seemed to be the thing you did gradually at first, spend more time in LA, but there was a time, I don't know, about 7-8 years ago when you went, I live in LA now, it's my home. Why? How? What does it represent for you?
I moved to LA for a bunch of reasons. First and foremost, and again, I'm sure that if people are hearing this in Ireland, they will appreciate this. I just didn't want to be cold anymore. New York is a wonderful place, but walking down Orchard Street in February when it's either freezing cold or cold and raining, I just realized life is short, and I just didn't want to live in an environment where I had an adversarial relationship with the outdoors. It's one of the greatest things about LA is the outdoors is your friend 363 days out of the year. And that's really nice. I think that's one reason why people in LA tend to be a little more open and relaxed. Every time they walk out their front door, it's nice. But also LA, there's a weirdness to LA that I really like. There's what people see on TV, whether it's Baywatch, and granted that's going back a ways, but the cliches of LA don't exist for me and my friends. For us, living in LA is going to the bookstore, going hiking in the mountains, going to the farmer's market, playing with dogs in the backyard. It's a very benign place.
Did you have preconceived notions about LA, as an East Coast punk? Was it this place that you thought you never would like, and it just evolved over time, or was it a no? How did the light switch flick for you? LA
was, when I was growing up, before I'd ever been here, or when I first started spending a little bit of time here, LA was very confusing to me, because on one hand, I was told by people that it was a vapid place, but then a lot of my favorite music came from here. The band X and The Doors came from here, and I was like, well, if it's a terrible place, how did some of my favorite music come from here? And then people would tell me that the entertainment business is completely shallow, and I was like, yeah, but David Lynch lives there, and my other favorite directors live there, and they're all working there. And then I started realizing a lot of my favorite writers lived here, and my favorite visual artists lived here. And at some point I realized that people's criticism of Los Angeles wasn't really based on much. It was just sort of a glib, blind criticism. But when you actually come here, it's a city that's warm in the winter, that's filled with artists and writers and musicians and lots of good vegan food, and we have 2 million acres of mountainous state park. So, I mean, it has its shortcomings, but the good stuff is pretty nice.
So we're, one of the reasons I'm here in LA, apart from talking with your good self, is, making these videos about how bad the traffic is. And we're sitting in the traffic, we're going into rush hour trying to find the traffic. And we're kind of going, is this gridlock? Because this doesn't feel like gridlock to us. This is moving. And then we're kind of going, is there a different concept of what gridlock is in LA to the rest of the world? Do people expect more? Because we're sitting in the traffic and we're expecting it's going to take us an hour to get a mile. And that hasn't happened yet.
Well, LA doesn't have gridlock. It just has traffic. Like, LA is built for cars. So it's not like the worst traffic I've ever experienced is in New York, where it's taken me 2 hours to get from like Manhattan to Newark Airport, which is 5 miles away. But that's because New York, Dublin, Moscow, London, like, these are places that aren't built for cars. So you get that actual gridlock when it doesn't move. That doesn't happen in LA. I'm not in any way saying that traffic here is good. I'm saying that it's terrible and abysmal, but it always moves. Even when it's awful, it can take you forever. Actually, no, we do have some gridlock, but just not in my neighborhood.
Tell me where to go. I'm looking for it.
The gridlock?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're the only person in history who's ever asked where the traffic is and how can they get there, go to Santa Monica and try to get past the 405 during rush hour.
We'll try that.
Find some street and you will experience gridlock that will make you want to shoot yourself in the head because it's bad. I mean, so my approach to traffic in LA is to stay home. I live and work in the same place. So, and luckily with Google Maps, not that I'm in any way affiliated with Google Maps, but you just look at the map and if it's red, stay home. If you get invited to a party and it's 7 p.m. in Santa Monica on a Friday, you simply say, no, I'm not going to. Well, why would I subject myself to sitting in the car for 2 hours in traffic? No, so you stay home, watch Game of Thrones, eat spaghetti. It's so much better than just subjecting yourself to that terrible traffic.
Do you think that you could have written Porcelain when your dear departed mother was still alive? Do you think that would have been a thing you were able to do?
Well, so writing Porcelain while my mom was still alive, my mom being alive wouldn't have been that big of a variable. The variable was more how, I don't know that I'm a terribly aware person right now, but my awareness is definitely greater than it was back then, or different. And I kind of, in order to write this book, Porcelain, I had to experience my rigid Christianity. I had to experience my very unrigid debauchery. I had to experience poverty. I had to experience wealth. I had to experience fame. I had to experience degradation. I had to experience all these things and then luckily move past them. So, hopefully, I think a lot of insight is very much the product of perspective. And perspective is the product of experience. And so I just think that as I'm older and I've been through the ringer and I've experienced a lot, I've had more experience, which gives me the perspective where I can hopefully write about things in a potentially insightful way.
Because when I was reading, I was thinking of my own mother going, okay, if I wrote something like this and my mother was alive, I don't know how I'd feel about her reading it.
Oh, my mom probably most of the, I hope my mom's won't be mad at me for saying this, but a lot of the stuff that I did, I'm assuming she did in her youth as well. It was weird. I gave copies of the book to my aunts and uncles. And I was like, there's gnarly stuff in this book. There's having really degenerate sex in a bathroom at the top of the World Trade Center. There's really rough stuff.
The dance floor.
Yeah, having sex on a dance floor, dancing around your own semen. There's gnarly, rough stuff in there. But to a large extent, everyone's been there. Not everyone has had sex on a dance floor surrounded by drag queens, but everyone's had compromised sex. Everyone, the messiness of the human condition is something that we've tried to either legislate against or we've tried to moralize against, but like, it's part of being human. Like, I think it's so odd, this idea, and I didn't grow up Catholic, so I can't speak to it, but a lot of my friends who grew up Catholic were brought up with this sense of shame around who they were physically, as if they almost had to hide themselves from God. And I was like, yeah, God has probably seen a lot worse. God has seen births. God has seen diarrhea. God has seen a trillion upon a trillion compromised orgasms. God has seen the worst physical, just disgusting nonsense you can imagine. I think that God is like an ER surgeon. Like, at this point, nothing would faze whoever God is. Like, I imagine God being very concerned with people's emotional state and their feelings and, their suffering. But I just don't see God being too concerned about the physical aspects of humanity, because that's who we are. Like, we're just a sloppy, messy bag of like gas and fluid.
In the book, the process of even you as a DJ choosing records and sharing them and making music, it really strikes me that music was like your trump card that you got to play, that enabled you to...
Bad choice of words.
But... Where do you think your gift came from?
I don't think I'm a gifted musician at all. I really don't. I think that my entire approach towards music, whether it's making music or listening to music, it's just enthusiasm. Like, I don't have an ability or a gift that is in any way different or unique from anyone else's. I just spent my whole life working on it. Like, I think some people have like inherent aptitude or orientation. All I've ever had, I think regarding music, I have two things: intense enthusiasm and an inability to do anything else. So like those times in my life when music wasn't working out, I didn't have a fallback career, so I just had to keep doing it.
It served you well.
But mainly enthusiasm is 99.9% of it.
I forgot to tell you, Moby, the show is called Born Optimistic.
Oh, okay.
You're the very first guest on Born Optimistic. Would you describe yourself as an optimist?
I am an optimist. That's a really good question. What I can say is there are many things that support my optimism, and there are many things that support my pessimism. But what I would qualify both optimism and pessimism with is it's based on a perspective that is not informed by omniscience. So my worldview, there's evidence to support it, but it's still, I'm not omniscient. Like, I don't know. It's why I try not to judge other people, because the moment I judge, I'm saying I fully understand where something is coming from, I fully understand what it is, and I fully understand what it's going to be. And I can't fully understand any of those things. So I'd say I'm 60% optimistic, 40% pessimistic, with hopefully some humility around my lack of omniscience.
Brilliant. We'll have to settle for 60%.
Yeah.
You're 60% there.
Yeah, I hope that, but I also hope that in order to be optimistic, I hope that whatever is in store for humans involves humans. I have this vision of, again, whoever or whatever God is, of just God's finger hovering over the reset button, and saying like, you know what, that humanity, that was kind of an interesting experiment, but in the future, I'm not going to let angry apes run the world.
This is the sound of me crossing my fingers.
Yeah, I'm just hoping
it ain't so.
I'm hoping that God is not about to press the reset button on humanity, because I'm curious to see where humans could go.
Thank you so much, Moby, for that amazing interview. Thanks to Declan Heaney, Dan Pops and Melissa Danis from Moby's team for setting up the interview. Thanks to Barry McDonough from Dare 360 who got us to LA in the first place. Thanks to Randy Verges for the graphics. Thanks to Roddy at Art19. Thanks to Louise Toll, Eric Trelfall and Martina McGlynn from RTE. Thanks to my love Zoe and all my friends for putting up with me. Thank you to Ivana for the transcript, which you can find at bornoptimistic.com. Until next week, we've got Tim Booth from James next Monday at 8 o'clock. Twitter, Born Optimistic. Facebook, Born Optimistic Show. Can't wait until next Monday at 8 o'clock. Thank you so much.